What if I told you that the greatest invention for food preservation for 50 years became an impenetrable fortress for humanity? We created the perfect food safe, but for half a century, we couldn't figure out how to unlock it. This is the story of how bayonets, hammers, and chisels became the first can openers, and why a brilliant solution caused more suffering than convenience for decades. How could it be that humanity invented an ideal way to store food, yet for almost 50 years forgot to devise a simple method to retrieve it? This isn't just a story about a can and a knife. It's a tale of the blind spots in our ingenuity, where a brilliant solution to one problem inadvertently creates an even more absurd one. It's as if someone invented a super-fast processor, but for half a century, no one could come up with a monitor to see its results. The ingenious technology exists, but it's trapped within itself. We'll explore how Napoleon's ambitions kicked off this technological race. We'll learn about polar expeditions where rescuers found neat stacks of cans next to frozen bodies, a silent testament to one of the most ironic tragedies in Arctic exploration history. And we'll find the answer to why the inventor of the can opener waited almost half a century for his moment, remaining overshadowed by his clumsy creation. It all began in the late 18th century. The world was racked by wars, and armies suffered less from bullets than from hunger and scurvy. Napoleon Bonaparte, understanding that an army marches on its stomach, announced a huge reward of 12,000 francs to anyone who could find a way to reliably preserve food for his soldiers. To put that in perspective, 12,000 francs was a fortune. An ordinary laborer's annual salary at the time was around 300 to 400 francs. Napoleon was offering a reward equivalent to 30 years of continuous labor for solving a single, yet paramount, problem for his army. He sought a technological miracle, and he got one. But he overlooked one critical detail. The first to answer the call was Parisian chef Nicolas Appert. After 15 years of experimentation, he introduced appertization, a method of boiling food in thick-walled glass bottles, which were then hermetically sealed with wax. And it worked. Food kept for months, and Appert received his reward from Napoleon. But for the army, glass proved disastrous. It was heavy, bulky, and constantly shattered in wagons. Most surprisingly, Appert, a confectioner, not a scientist, had no understanding of microbes. Louis Pasteur's groundbreaking discoveries were still 50 years away. He operated through trial and error, proving that heating and airtight sealing worked, but without ever truly understanding why. Appert's concept was quickly adopted by Englishman Peter Durand. In 1810, he posed a simple question: what if fragile glass could be replaced with something more robust? He patented the idea of using an iron container, internally coated with tin to prevent rust. Thus, the tin can as we know it today was born, durable, lightweight, reliable, a true iron soldier for provisions. Interestingly, Durand was a merchant, not an inventor. He patented the concept itself, rather than a specific device, and then sold the patent for £1,000 sterling to bona fide industrialists, Brian Donkin and John Hall. It was they who launched the world's first commercial cannery. Early cans were produced manually. They were heavy cylinders made of thick wrought iron sheets, with lids soldered on with lead. Each weighed over a pound, half a kilogram. Before any food was added, they were advertised as absolutely indestructible. And that was the pure truth. So much so that even their owners couldn't get into them. Imagine not a modern thin tin can, but rather a section of plumbing pipe or a miniature steam boiler. A skilled tinsmith could only produce about 60 such cans per day. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a factory owner in 1820. You're selling these cans to the British Navy. Your primary marketing appeal is durability. You proudly declare, "Our canned goods will withstand any journey." The question of how they will be opened doesn't concern you at all. That's a soldier's problem, not yours. The main thing is to deliver the cargo intact. This is the classic "it works on my machine" syndrome. The engineer solved his problem, hermetic sealing. But the fact that the end user lacks the necessary software to access the data, that's no longer their concern. By 1813, the British Royal Navy was already heavily purchasing canned provisions. The technology seemed perfect. The food inside was safe. But along with the can, soldiers and sailors received an unsolvable puzzle. Thus began 50 years of war, not against an enemy, but against their own lunch. By 1818, the fleet had ordered 24,000 cans. That's 24,000 unsolvable metal puzzles sent sailing around the world. Early cans came with no instructions. Soldiers and sailors had to improvise. The most obvious tool was a bayonet. They literally stabbed through the lid, risking both themselves and the contents. If a bayonet wasn't available, anything available was used: hammers, chisels, axes, stones. The act of opening a can became a blacksmith's arduous task. In the most desperate cases, as some diaries attest, soldiers would simply place a can on the ground and shoot it with a musket. This was the fastest, yet most wasteful, way to get to their meal. When manufacturers finally realized there was a problem, their solution was ingenious in its simplicity. Some cans began to feature instructions. To open, use a chisel and hammer. They didn't invent a new tool. They simply suggested using one already found in any ship's hold or arsenal. Cans found at Arctic campsites bore the inscription, "Cut round the top near the outer edge with a chisel and hammer." This wasn't a recommendation, but an official directive. Opening a can of peas was now a task for a carpenter. Just stop for a second and imagine you're hungry. Before you is a can of stew. In your hands, only a large rock. What would you do? How many blows would it take to pierce the metal without spilling its entire contents? Share in the comments what common household item you would use if you found yourself in such a situation. The absurdity of the situation reached its climax during polar expeditions. The most famous case is Sir John Franklin's ill-fated expedition of 1845. When rescuers found their last encampment, they discovered mountains of canned goods. The crew of 129 perished from starvation and scurvy, unable to open all their supplies with hands stiffened by the freezing temperatures. Food was tantalizingly close, yet utterly inaccessible. Archaeological digs on King William Island in the 1990s corroborated this grim picture. Vast piles of both empty and full cans were found. Some had been crudely breached, others lay untouched. This became tangible evidence of their desperate struggle against their own provisions. But even if a can was successfully opened, it didn't guarantee safety. The seams were sealed with lead, and during crude opening, particles of the toxic metal would contaminate the food. Many researchers from the Franklin expedition, it was later discovered, suffered from chronic lead poisoning. The main danger came from the lead solder plug used to seal the filling hole after the can was filled. It was about the size of a button. If opened clumsily, this lead bead would drop directly into the food. Analysis of hair and bones from Franklin's crew showed lead levels 20 times higher than normal. The iron can protected the food from bacteria, but ironically poisoned it itself. So why didn't anyone come up with a simple solution? The answer lay in the cans themselves. They were made of such thick iron that a simple hand tool would have been futile. Leverage and immense force were required. Attempting to open such a can with a pocket knife was akin to trying to saw through a modern safe with a nail file. The problem wasn't the tool. It was the sheer scale of the armor. The problem wasn't a lack of ideas, but the absence of a material that could be easily cut. The world didn't just need an inventor. It needed two things simultaneously, both thinner, stronger metal for the cans and a person who would finally look at the problem and declare, "This has to stop." And this crucial shift began not in military barracks, but in household kitchens. By the mid-19th century, canned goods were no longer an exclusive ration for soldiers and sailors. They found their way onto grocery store shelves, and from there, into the pantries of ordinary citizens. Now, homemakers were purchasing them. And while a soldier with a bayonet at the ready is a familiar sight, a woman in a bonnet attacking a can of peaches with a hammer and chisel, that was nothing short of a farce. This phenomenon is called domestication of technology. When a military or industrial invention enters everyday life, the demands for user-friendliness, what we now term user experience, increased tenfold. The technology had to become user-friendly, or it would simply die out. And the person who said, "Enough is enough," appeared in 1858, almost 50 years after the can itself was patented. His name was Ezra Warner. He wasn't a great scientist or a renowned engineer. He was a tinsmith from Waterbury, Connecticut, a man who worked with metal every day and understood its stubbornness and its vulnerabilities like no other. The solution emerged not from a laboratory, but from a workshop, not from a theorist, but from a practitioner. Warner's invention was a far cry from the sleekness of modern can openers. It was a crude, almost predatory hybrid of a bayonet and a sickle. It had a short, powerful blade that had to be forcefully plunged into the center of the lid. Then, bracing a special guard against the can's rim, you would saw the metal in a circular motion, like a lumberjack. It was awkward. It was dangerous. The blade could easily slip. But it was the first tool in history specifically designed for one purpose: opening cans. And its baptism by fire didn't happen in a kitchen. Its first users were Union Army soldiers during the American Civil War. It was still perceived as a rugged military implement, not an elegant kitchen gadget. But Warner's genius would have been in vain had it not been for a second, invisible revolution, the one that occurred with the metal itself. The success of his opener was only possible because metallurgy had advanced significantly by this time. Cans finally began to be made from thinner steel rather than the heavy wrought iron of earlier cans. The armor had thinned. The key factor was the Bessemer process, patented just 2 years before Warner's opener in 1856. It enabled the mass production of inexpensive and, crucially, thin-gauge steel. Without this breakthrough in metallurgy, Warner's opener would have remained a useless curiosity, unable to tackle the steam boilers of the past. The technologies of the can and the opener had finally converged. The first step was taken. Awkward, crude, but decisive. The door to the iron fortress was finally breached, even if with a crowbar, and once that happened, human ingenuity surged forward. A true arms race began for the most convenient, fastest, and safest way to access a can of stew or pineapple. The next breakthrough occurred in 1870. William Lyman invented the familiar can opener with a cutting wheel, no more piercing the lid. The opener moved along the can's edge, neatly slicing the metal. This was significantly safer and simpler. This principle formed the basis of most modern mechanical can openers. It was a transition from brute force to surgical precision. Warner's opener was like an axe hacking through a wall. Lyman's was like a glass cutter, making a clean, precise incision. The entire philosophy of the tool had shifted. In 1925, the famous butterfly-style opener with 2 handles appeared, providing even greater leverage. And in 1931, with the spread of electricity, the first electric can opener was patented. A task that took a 19th century soldier half an hour now took 10 seconds and required no effort. But here's the paradox. The first electric opener was patented in 1931, but was not a commercial success. It only truly gained popularity in the late 1950s when its design was refined and it transformed into a stylish kitchen appliance. Let's introduce a convenience scale from 1 to 10. A rock or bayonet would be a 1, a chisel and hammer a 2, Warner's opener a 4, Lyman's wheel opener a 7, an electric one a 9. But what about a 10 out of 10? A 10 is when no tool is needed at all. And that solution appeared in 1959. Ermal Fraise invented the pull tab for beverage cans, and this technology eventually migrated to food cans. The problem was solved perfectly. The opening mechanism itself became part of the packaging. The circle was complete. It took humanity over 150 years to evolve from a chisel to a simple pull tab. Legend has it that Fraise's idea struck him at a picnic when he forgot his beer opener and resorted to prying open a can against a car bumper. Frustrated, he decided the key should always be with the can. This moment of everyday frustration revolutionized the world of packaging forever. This peculiar story is more than just a curious anecdote. It's a perfect case study in how we innovate. And hidden within this 50-year delay are several crucial lessons that are relevant for any inventor, programmer, or entrepreneur today. The first lesson: user experience is not an empty phrase. You can create the most reliable, most secure product in the world, but if it's inconvenient or impossible to use, it's essentially useless. The inventors of the can were so fixated on the challenge of preservation that they entirely overlooked the problem of access. In modern terms, they created an ideal back-end, a flawless data storage system. But for almost 50 years, they forgot about the front end, the user interface for retrieving that data, and without a convenient interface, any back-end is merely dead weight. A product's true value is realized at the moment of its use, not merely at its existence. The second lesson, innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. The can opener couldn't emerge sooner, not for lack of ideas, but because the cans themselves were too robust. A solution must mature in conjunction with the technology it addresses. This phenomenon is known as adjacent possibility. The concept of a simple opener had been in the air for decades, but it remained a fantasy until advances in metallurgy opened the door to its reality. You couldn't create a smartphone app before the smartphone itself existed. Innovation isn't a blind leap into the void, but a confident step into an adjacent room that has just been made accessible. And the third most elegant lesson, the most ingenious can opener is its very absence. Ermal Frase's pull tab didn't improve the opener. It rendered it obsolete, making it unnecessary. The best solution to any problem is to create a system where the problem simply doesn't arise in the first place. Don't invent a better lock. Eliminate the door altogether. Don't devise a more complex password. Implement fingerprint access. This perfectly illustrates the famous design principle. Perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. The pull tab removed an entire superfluous, cumbersome element from the system. This is the pinnacle of engineering ingenuity. So what was it? This 50-year delay in inventing a simple opener. Brilliant engineers making a foolish, almost comical mistake? Or was it an entirely natural process where one technology simply had to await the emergence of another, like a train at a station waiting for its locomotive? Was it human oversight or technological inevitability? In the comments, share just one word that you believe best describes this story. Blindness or inevitability? We're very interested to hear your thoughts.